I think a poet is always listening, consciously or unconsciously. I find my content, my inspiration from many different sources, language itself probably primarily, and then how to mold it without molding it, how to have intention without having intention, how to give up my ego and let things come forward in a non-controlling way. I mean, you have to, as a poet, you have to eventually have some craft at work, but I like to try to find that balance between having craft at work, having intention and not having intention, giving up the ego, and letting many different influences come in. One of my books, Flutter Tongue 3, Disarray, was an attempt to write like a jazz musician. Not write about jazz, but write like I was playing jazz with language. So music is there. So that involves the ear.
No longer speaking, listening with the whole body, pulse that precedes breath, the head of
Poetry is of the body. The body is an organ, a muscle, and so I try to not just work up here, I try to work here, and from the rest. And because I perform sound poetry, you do engage the channel, like singers in a way. But sound poets are more interested in the phonemics, the particles, the atoms, the molecules, and not whole words, whole phrases, whether they give clarity and meaning or not. Sound poetry, of course, challenges our desire to understand. It's about language. Language is sound. Sound can be constructed in many different ways, and it can have nonsense and be non-semantic and still be powerful. And there is a history to sound poetry, of course. It's at least over 100 years old now. Last year, because it was the 100th anniversary since the Cabaret Voltaire, where things called sound poems were first performed in Zurich, performed a lot of Hugo Ball pieces whenever I would give a reading. He's the alleged father of sound poetry, although there are other sources. So I like to kind of keep that tradition alive too, so I'll keep working at that as well as part of my work. The work that I've done as a sound poet has influenced my work when I use words and sentences and verses on the page. The obvious would be in terms of using the ear with language, but the other is just the freedom that one strives for in sound poetry, like a jazz musician going on an improv riff. I try to bring that into my work with real words and real phrases and real sentences. I try to keep that kind of improvisatory aspect, and that's what I try to do with each new work, is to find a different way into poetry, because I don't want to do the same thing I did in the last book. I want to find a new way in, a new challenge. I want to keep myself from getting bored and repetitive.
Who's the creator here anyway?
I try to bring the willingness to jump off a cliff into each new poetic work.
I try, though it feels impossible, to reinvent my lips.